Well, hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another Friday and another Ziti TV. Back again. This week, we're going to be looking at, bum, 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 if I can get it. There it is. We're going to be looking at BrowZer and ZAC again. We had a user out in the forums who was wondering about protecting their services using ZAC and checking out ZAC and hosting ZAC through BrowZer. Great use case for ZAC. And so we wanted to go through and actually close down this little reminder because it's going to bother me. Boop, boop, boop. Sorry. We wanted to go through and look at what it looks like to host the ZAC and how we would expose the ZAC using BrowZer and just have a general working session. So if you have any questions, go ahead and feel free, fire them into the chat, say hi, and we'll get right into it. All righty. Here is a terminal window. And I have already installed an OpenZT overlay network. I've already installed the BrowZer bootstrapper using Docker. So if I do a Docker PS out, let's do a DPS. There we go. Alias DPS. If anybody is interested, Docker PS format table, and then give it a little format. Gives you a Docker command that's a bit easier to look at than all of the details here. So that's what DPS is. You can see I've got a few services deployed. I have the Docker Whale deployed, listening on port 2000. So I could do a curl to localhost 2000 and get the Docker Whale. Oftentimes what I use to verify my BrowZer installation. Well, and if you don't know what BrowZer is, why don't we go back and let's talk about BrowZer for just 2 seconds. If you come out to openziti.io/docs, and then you come into Quick Starts console, underneath console, you'll find BrowZer. BrowZer, as it says, is a set of technologies that basically is able to bootstrap a zero trust overlay connection entirely in your browser without the need for an agent. A lot of times you'll see us, particularly me, I will use the ZD Desktop Edge for Windows, which looks like this, and you can see it is off right now. So I have no agent running. Agents would be, some process that runs locally, and the job in life of that agent is to get traffic from your local underlay IP-based network onto the OpenZT overlay network. So that's what BrowZer is. If you haven't set up BrowZer, you can come out here and follow these steps, and hopefully they all still work. I'm pretty sure they do. We do have some small gotchas, which is why this whole topic came up. And the most important about those gotchas is if you go to the console, the ZD admin console, which is the UI for OpenZT. Let's go ahead and look at what that looks like. We can go to controller, 8441 ZAC. This is my ZAC. Yep, got a wrong password. Here we go. This is the UI for the OpenZT controller. You can go and you can see the identities that are there. You can see services. You can see configs. You can see what routers are online, all that sort of stuff. All these sorts of things you can do with the ZT CLI as well. But the UI, is clicky, clicky, and people like to click. So that's what the UI is all about. What we wanted to do is we wanted to use BrowZer, this guy right here, use BrowZer to, we don't have a diagram. Oh, I have to get a diagram on there. We wanted to use BrowZer to protect ZAC itself. Not only ZAC, but also the management API itself. And so, I was going back and talking about when you install the console, there are a few steps that you can choose to follow, one of which is downloading it directly from GitHub, one of which is using Docker. And if you follow along with the deployments guide and Linux and console, if you follow the console deployment guide under deployments, it's going to tell you yet another way to do this. And that's because documentation is an evergreen, ever-living thing. We've been making improvements to our production-based installations, and production-based installs are not considered quick starts, meaning quick starts were always meant to get you up and running very quickly, not particularly resilient, meaning you'll have one router, you'll have one controller, you'll have everything on one box, which is totally fine for like, most people, particularly if you're just playing around. But now with the production-based installations, we have a different recommendation. The ZD console team has changed ZAC from being hosted by Node to being an SPA because if you're not aware, the NF console, which is the Net Foundry console, which is basically Cloud ZD or and a Net Foundry Cloud, is instances of OpenZD, right? So Net Foundry, the company, provides these networks for people who don't want to run and maintain their own network. And so the Net Foundry console, if you were to log into it, is now powered by ZAC, or will be soon. I don't know exactly the timing. I'm pretty sure it's currently powered by ZAC. And so the ZAC is also open source, fully open source. So there are things which the Net Foundry Cloud will add on top of ZAC, more enterprisey type features, but the basic functionality that you need in order to run and maintain your overlay network is all contained inside of ZAC here. And the Net Foundry Cloud team has decided to host ZAC, the ZD Admin Console, from CDN, a content delivery network, as opposed to having to run a web server. Totally reasonable, makes perfect sense. And so ZAC was converted from a Node app into a single page web app. And that conversion still is going on from time to time. You'll see new pages pop up, but they'll all be Angular based nowadays. So with the invention of the single page app, I was able to update the ZD controller so that in the controller's config file, you can now specify a ZAC binding. And what it will do is it will actually deliver the static content of the ZAC from the controller. It means you don't have one extra server that you have to download and install and run. That works great. And so right here, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the ZAC as provisioned and run and delivered from the OpenZD controller. If I take off the URL, you'll see I get the API, I get JSON back. And so we wanted to secure ZAC using BrowZer. And I did my best. Me and Kurt spent, Kurt is the developer who develops BrowZer, spent a little while. And because of the way the single page app works and because of my misunderstandings and maybe a bug here and there, I couldn't get it to work. So for today's episode of Ziti TV, we're going to be deploying the ZAC with a node-based deployment. Again, going back to the documentation, I don't know, it is not available in the production deployment, but up under quick starts and console, you can go down to the using Docker and run it as a Docker container. When you do this, Node will be fired up for you. That's what's running inside the Docker container itself. And that Node server will deliver the single page app, the ZAC itself. So that's how we're going to run our ZAC. And I've already started that over here to make sure it would work. We go back to our terminal, find the command that I want to run, which is around here somewhere. Here it is. And it's going to be, I really don't like my, let's see, export ps1 equals BrowZer : space. There we go. Now I got a much smaller, I don't know what directory I'm in. I'll have to type pwd to find out. But now I can type docker run rm. Rm will remove the container if it exits. Name it the ZAC, and we'll give it port 1408. And OpenZD/ZAC is the name of the container image to run. When that comes online, it's now listening on 1408. So if I were to SSH to my ZROC machine, and I curl to http://localhost 1408, you'll see I get a response back. Now, 1408 is not available on the internet. Well, at least it shouldn't be. Let's go and find out. So if we go to 1408 out here, it should just spin and spin because 1408 is not available on the open internet. And so what we'll do is I'm going to use this version of ZAC that's actually deployed out here, and we'll create a service that will allow BrowZer to bootstrap a connection to the ZAC running under port 1408. Again, if you have any questions, please just fire them into the chat. All right. So out here, let me make this bigger. So I have the ZAC listening up here. I can stop it anytime I want, and port 1408 will no longer be listening. We can see that by LNTP. We can see 1408. And if we do a sudo, where's 1408 in here? Right there. We can see Docker is running. So ZAC is running inside of Docker. All right. If we take a look at the, let's see, reinstall, I have my little scripts in this location. Oh, I know I want to do an export PS1 equals BrowZer TV. Oh, BrowZer TV. Yeah, I love it. All right, so there's BrowZer TV's PS1. Now in here, I have a Docker Compose file that I have created. And this Docker Compose file has within it the ZD browser bootstrapper targets. Hopefully you're familiar with that. If you're not, I'm going to just keep coming back here. If you go through the example enabling browser and last year's ZD TV where I did all this, it should all still work. We're going to continue to use the node-based app, which did not exist last year, which was the whole idea of this ZD TV. But because of whatever bug I ended up hitting, I didn't have enough time to get the ZD TV to work with BrowZer, with the management API, with it carved off the internet and all that sort of stuff. So we're going to use the node-based ZAC, as I mentioned. And so I have a vhost declared for browzac.clint.demo.openzd.org. So if I were to go to that URL right now, I do believe it will work because I'm pretty sure I set this up ahead of time. And so let's see. I am federated through Keycloak. BrowZer allows you, mandates you to have an IDP that's on the internet, which you can authenticate through or to, and that IDP needs to be configured in the OpenZD overlay correctly. That's, there's some steps involved in there. You can, again, read the doc, and also under the BrowZer IDP section, Kurt has created a whole bunch of doc, around these things down here too. So you can follow that doc to understand how to configure BrowZer better or differently if this doesn't work for you. I'm not going to do that on this ZD TV because it just take too long. So I've already done all that work. So I can go to GitHub, and I can go to my ZD realm here, and I can click GitHub. And when I do that, because my browser is already authenticated to GitHub, because I'm in GitHub all day long, all the time, you can see the bootstrapper just goes through and bootstraps the whole thing. You'll also see the new, if you haven't seen it before, the new graph that shows you things are happening in browser land, and that it auto hides that. But you can see I've attached to my ZAC through BrowZer. If we look up here, we can see browzac.clint.demo.openzd.org. I can give it a controller name. Now, what's interesting, and if you try to do the same thing, you'll need to be careful here, because if I type IP adder, I've got some 172 address. Here it is. Now, when you run Docker and when you run ZAC inside of Docker, your ZAC will try to connect to your Edge API that is relative to where your ZAC is hosted. When it's hosted in the same app, or when it's hosted on the same port as the management API, it's no big deal, because if you can get to the management API, you can get to ZAC. But with BrowZer and with Docker and with ZAC inside of Docker, technically, this Docker instance needs to be able to break out of Docker and talk back to the ZD controller, which is not running in Docker. So if I come over here and I do the ss -lntp again, actually let's do sudo, and I pipe into grep for ZD, you'll see port 8441 is used by the ZD CLI. And that is because it's being delivered on this URL, controller.clint.demo.openzd.org, port 8441. However, my ZAC will also be able to get there if I go to https:// that IP address. So basically, I'm kind of hairpinning outside of Docker back into the base operating system. So there's the URL. I'll set that controller. That is the right URL, except it doesn't have a colon. So of course it won't work. There we go. Put in our username and our password. And you'll see I have this exact same thing. And now this is all protected through BrowZer or through BrowZer. I call it BrowZer browser. So if I look at the configurations and I go to these configurations, it should not shock you. They are the same. What does shock me is management, and one says manage configurations. I wonder why that is. I don't know. Maybe I'll point that out to Ryan, and he can tell me why. I expect him to can't answer why. All right, so now we can access our ZAC through BrowZer. How did I do all that? Really the key, other than vi BrowZer dc.yaml, other than this target right here, which is very important, you can see I use the scheme of HTTP, not HTTPS. If I were using the management API, I would have to change that scheme. And I use this service called BrowZer. All right, so that's, and then Ziti, and I don't think IDP realm is important anymore. I don't know if IDP type is important anymore. I'll have to ask Kurt about those two things. I don't think they're important anymore, but the service BrowZer is definitely important. So if we look at the service called BrowZer, we can see that it's got a couple of configurations, a host config and an intercept config. We come over to configurations, type BrowZer, and look at our host config. Our host config here is sending traffic to localhost port 1408. Again, the service is being offloaded from the edge router. So my edge router, let's go and look at edge routers right here. My edge router, also located on that same box. If I come over here and I look at port 3022, the default edge API port, you can see Ziti is also running that, and it's a different process, 11070. So if I do a ps minus ef pipe grep for that, you can see that is the Ziti router process that's running here. Okay, so we have a quick start that I started up, and it has a controller and a router on the same machine. And now on that same machine, I'm also running Docker, and inside of Docker, I'm running ZAC on port 1408. And so that's why this service, when I go to the BrowZer service, the configuration, the host configuration, that's why localhost 1408 works. All right, hopefully all that makes sense. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to remove my management API from the internet. And when I do that, I'll not be able to get to this anymore because 8441 will no longer be available. So we do that by going to the quick start IP, going to the controllers config file, and finding at the very bottom, you'll find an APIs section under Edge. Where is under Web? I'm sorry, under Web, and you'll see a bunch of well, there won't be a bunch, but you can make a bunch of different entries, different web entries, and then you can host whatever services you'd like on those entries. I'm going to make this a bit smaller so that it hopefully fits on my full screen. Okay, it's going to have to be quite a bit smaller. All right, now it all fits. I just didn't want this identity block to wrap. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy all of this stuff into a notepad so that I can show you everything in one big editor and not have to use VI. Fabric and ZAC. Oops. All right. So it looks like this. All right. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through, I'm going to get rid of the comments. So anything with a pound in front of it, just to eliminate some noise. All right. And so at the end of the day, this is what it looks like when you have the web section and you have the client and the management API all in one web binding. Now I'm going to make a new web binding. I'm going to call this just management. And when I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave only the Edge client up here. So let's call this Edge client. I'll still bind on 8441. That's fine. That I'm not going to change any of this. I'm going to use all the same identities. All the stuff will be the same. I'll leave all the options. That does not look right, does it? Do I have a bad options? Did I delete something I shouldn't have? Looks like I did, but I don't know what. Where is the options? Oh, I must have copied it twice. Okay. This one is incorrect. So we'll get rid of that. YAML all needs to be indented to the same level. And so I'm going to leave all of this stuff the same. And instead, I'm glad. Let's see. We have Arturo. Where's my little mouse? Says, seeing it without the comments is really helpful. Good idea. You're welcome. I agree. It's a lot to look at when you read, all of it together. When you boil it out, it's not so much. We can take a look at each section too. The bind points. This is where the web binding wants to create a listener. So on this machine, it'll be 8441, and it'll advertise, meaning tell the world that this is the address that you are to connect to me on. The identity section, very important for all of OpenZT overlay technology. This defines the CA. As you can see, the list of root CAs to be trusted, the key and the server and the cert to be used for this particular server, and then an alternative server chain. With BrowZer, you need alternative server certs because the BrowZer, was BrowZer here. Oh, I have a 5-minute timeout on this, so I'm going to have to click GitHub a lot. The BrowZer bootstrapper will need to connect to a URL which is verifiable by your browser itself. That means by default, you'll need a certificate that is signed by one of the well-known CAs in the world. That way, when your browser connects, it will just trust it. You don't need to do that. You can sign your own certificates, and you can add that certificate to your browser or to your operating system or however you want. What's important is when the URL that the BrowZer bootstrapper will tell your browser to connect to is going to be, and we'll take a tiny detour here. It's going to be, where's my Edge router? YAML. It's going to be, where is the advertised section? Here it is. It's going to be this guy right here, advertise, this one. So there's a WebSocket listener on 8505 in my situation here. And if you were to go out and go to https://:8505, that must be available, and your browser must not think the connection is insecure. It must think it's secure. And that's why alternative server certs are used. For the server, it's not as important, for the controller. But that's why when I go to the ZAC on the old URL, it also is valid because I'm using that alternative server cert. I just use them in the controller as well as the WebSocket listener. Okay, so on my Edge client, I'm going to keep these bindings. And then what I'm going to want to do is make a new binding called management MGMT API. Sure. And on that binding, we're going to keep the Fabric API, the ZAC API or SPA, and the Edge Management API. Now, the easiest thing to do is to keep, when you have your when you have your controller, you'll see The quick start also was meant to be educational. And so because it was meant to be educational, it's redundant. And so if you look at the top of your control, if you follow the quick start, I believe the production install doesn't do this sort of stuff because it's not meant to be a quick start. But if you look at if you ran the quick start, you look at the top, you'll see an identity block. And this identity block will almost certainly be identical to the identity block that's down below. Let's take a quick screen cap. Oh, not on that screen, on this screen. There it is. We'll take a quick screen cap and then we'll scroll down to where this section is. And then we'll make this bigger and we'll see that in the web binding section, this stuff is all the same. The client cert, well, it's not the same. What am I talking about? It's different because the controller's PKI is the control plane for the OpenZT controller can have a different PKI than the Edge API. And so in the complicated example that the Quick Start does for education, you'll see the Edge controller intermediate is used in the Edge section, and there's no Edge controller intermediate in the controller section. It's just defaulted to the controller. So if you look right here, you'll see Edge controller listed in the web section, but not in the default section. Again, this goes into OpenZT's PKI. It's a bit more than talking about BrowZer, but it's why we're going to want to copy this whole identity block because it will be important. And I'm going to copy the bind points as well. And I'm going to change this to, I'm going to put it on 18.441. Let me just make sure I don't have anything on 18.441, SSLNTP 18441, because I use that a lot. Nope. All right. So I'm going to have it on 18.841, and I'm going to advertise 127.0.0.1. 18.841 because I don't need anybody to get to this API. It's going to be entirely local. I'm taking the management API high value target off of the internet. If anybody can manipulate your overlay network, that would obviously be a bad thing. So we're going to take that off the internet and listen on 127 only. I don't know what will happen when I do this with the ZT CLI because I haven't done this for a minute, but we'll find out together. Okay, and then we have our alternative service certs. Technically, I don't need that, but I'm going to just keep it. We have our options, and then we have our APIs that we want to bind. And so it'll look like this. So now I want the Edge Management API, I want the Fabric, and I want the ZAC. And so I'm going to just copy all this. I'm going to leave that comment out because it's the way I roll. I'm going to edit my IP, and I'm going to comment out this here. This, and this. All right. And so now and I'm not going to call it Edge Management. We're going to call it Client API. Okay. And so at this point, when I restart this controller, I have one web section named Client Management. Oh, I changed the wrong one. I can't change Edge Client. What's the binding name called? Edge Client. Okay. And the binding Edge Management. I don't want this one either. Okay. Now I just have Edge Client. What I wanted to change was the name of it up here. It says Client Management. Okay. I'm going to leave that. That's fine. Okay. Oops. All right. Now I'm going to go to the bottom of my controller's config file, and I'm going to insert, not a comment. Get rid of all my spaces because YAML is very particular about its spaces. And I'll copy all of this and paste it all in. Now I have a management API in here, and doing a quick scan, I think it looks right. I did copy the comment. And so we'll write and quit, and then we will live life dangerously. Journal, CTL, FU, ZD controller, and we'll just make sure this thing starts up again. And so we'll do sudo systemctl restart ZD controller. And it didn't start. Unknown. Okay, line 232. Let's see. 232, go. Okay. right, quit. Didn't like all the extra space. That's cool. Certificate signed by an unknown authority. So right now, my expectation is BrowZer is losing its mind because BrowZer is trying to connect to my management API. But that would surprise me. I wouldn't expect it to be doing that. So let's look at BrowZer's journal, CTL, bro. Actually, I don't know what it's called. It's Docker. That's what it is. Docker logs, browser bootstrapper, follow. Unknown vhost. So what I don't know is whether or not BrowZer is trying to connect to my management API. I wouldn't expect it to. It does look like it's settled down. BrowZer looks like it's settled down. And let's see if the controller is still having a hard time. I mean, somebody's just hitting it. And it's coming from inside the house. This is my IP address. All right, so I must have something that is connected here that I'm not aware of. Probably a tunneler of some kind. Probably my Quadra would be my guess. So I probably have some identity that's trying to reconnect over and over again, and I've changed something. That's fine. Okay, so we'll ignore that for now. When I go over to the console, I should not be able to get to the ZAC anymore. And you can see it says unhandled edge client ZAC configs was not found because there is no ZAC binding anymore. Let's try BrowZer and we'll see if BrowZer works. Right here, click this. Error. BrowZer connect attempt failed on network. Access was revoked. Okay, so let's kick BrowZer once and see what happens. Docker stop. This guy. DPS Docker start. This guy. Obviously, I wouldn't expect that to be necessary, but maybe it was. And maybe I'll try a private window as well, just to see if there's any kind of state involved that is getting in my way. Oh boy, let me go do this off screen. Give me 2 seconds, and I will go and find my GitHub username and my GitHub password, and I'll put it into my private window. Let's just make sure I'm not sharing. I'm not. Okay. Not that you'd probably see much of it, but let's see. Copy the username, paste. Copy the password, paste. And TOTP, paste. All right. And there we go. Now BrowZer is bootstrapping. Let's see if I did it right. I always love doing it live. You never know. I didn't have a chance to do this before. So I screwed something up, I think. Let's see. Let's go looking at it looks like the service might be down. So what could I possibly have done wrong in here? Now it's time to troubleshoot. We have successfully carved off the management API from the internet, though, right? We have proven that. Where is my other? I can't find the right browser window. Let's go over here, click on this, go on this, click on this, and go here. And let's see, URLs API. Where is the management API v1? So you can see the management API is available on 18.441/edge/management. And if I come back over to here and do a curl -sk through https:// make sure it responds, and it does. So it is, and I mean, so if I do SSLNTP, obviously it'll be on 18.441 now. Okay, so let's see. Can I Ziti Edge log in to? Nope. To this right here, 18.441-u admin. Yes, and then I can. Okay, so Ziti Edge list identities. Clear. Ziti Edge list services. hello. No, yeah, I got to type it right. Ziti Edge list services. All right. So the management API is up and it is running. And I just have a problem with my browser configuration. So let's go look at the ZD, actually, CD to this location, because I have my BrowZer. This is how I created the service. Offload port of 1408, offload address of localhost. This is my BrowZer. And so my browser ZAC is not able to connect to something, and it's giving me ZD service BrowZer connect attempt failed on ZD network. Is it because of my offload? Where's my offload is port, offload address is localhost. Oh, but this is BrowZer, so that should be correct. Well, now, I am not exactly certain what I did wrong. That is a bummer. I don't know if Kurt is out there watching me struggle. If not, maybe somebody else, maybe Ken's out there and knows what's going on. Let's go back and look at the error code. ZD service BrowZer connect attempt failed. So this means the browser. Okay, so what we do is we look at web tools at this point, and we look for error messages. So let's go back to BrowZer, connect. And we see all this. And we see connect failed on connect channel. Now complete. Is it possible to do with something 18441 specified for ZAC? No, it shouldn't be. That's a good question. And what I should do is I should tunnel myself. Let's do that. Let's tunnel my environment there using ZD. So I'll turn on my ZD Desktop Edge for Windows. I will create ZD Edge, create a service, local access ZAC configs. I'm going to need what config is going to be. It's going to be. So let's look at the intercept. The intercept should be right, I think. Let's cat BrowZer. A different directory. Cat BrowZer. So I have an intercept config that's intercepting on whatever the intercept address is, which is service.zd, so browzac.zd, so that'll be right. I have a service there, so I should be able to just dial this particular service. All right, so ZD, let's go back and create an identity. ZD Edge, create Edge, create identity, Clint, browzac-o, to the home directory, call it Clint browzac.jwt, exit cd to temp. Let's see, I'm Windows, so where do I cd to temp? SCP from here, the browzac jwt to dot. Go over to here. Nope, no more here. Add an identity. C temp browzac. Those are GIFs. What did I call it? Clint browzac. That's why. Clint browzac. Added my identity. Currently unauthorized, no services. That's what I would expect. Let's now authorize a service. So we have to SSH back to CD ZRock and do a ZD Edge list services. Just make sure we have access and ZD Edge list service policies. So people who can dial the BrowZer are BrowZer dialers. So I will ZD Edge update identity. What I call it, Clint BrowZer -a. No identities found with Clint BrowZer. Did I spell it wrong? BrowZer. And it should be prefixed, of course, with this. Okay, and so now I've added to my identity the BrowZer dialers attribute, so I can do a ZD Edge policy advisor, identities, Clint BrowZer, and you'll see I can dial Clint BrowZer now. Also, you might have noticed the service came in while I was waiting. And so now BrowZer.ZD on port 80 should be available to me. So let's do HTTP BrowZer.ZD. And it's not available. Connection refused. Okay. So now we do a journal CTL FU ZD router. And we see if something is going on here. Reconnect, message failed, bunch of message fails. Failed to dial the fabric. Error creating route. Dial TCP 127.14.08. Connection refused. Well, so Arturo, you were right. I stopped the ZAC at some point. That's on me. Let's start the ZAC back up again, shall we? All right. Now it's listening on 14.08. Well, that's not embarrassing, right? All right, let's come back over here and we'll see what happens if these, I can already see ZD admin console. So this should be coming through. I don't know why it's not rendering. One error, cross origin policy has been ignored. Okay. So let's go back and try BrowZer again. And BrowZer. And this will never work. Also not, there it comes. All right. Look at that. All right. So we did it. So we successfully took it off the internet. We successfully troubleshooted it, right? Let's turn this back off. So local, I think was what I called it. And 172, it's not on there. Let me go back and find my IP address. IP adder. It's 172 something or other. And http:// pay. Oh no, this is 8441 and it's HTTPS. Set the controller. It's not it's now 18.441. Set that controller. Admin. And there we have it. So now we've successfully accessed BrowZer. We've successfully taken our management API off the internet. It's no longer available. Can't be scanned anymore. Can't find it. We changed the port to 18.441. We successfully connected our existing ZAC to it. And we even connected a identity to make sure that it was working in a troubleshooting escapade. I'm surprised I'm still getting the, let's see, what do I call it? BrowZer.ZD. I would not expect this to have given me a fit. I don't know why this course policy is failing. If I do an F12 on this, I'll show you what I mean. It says the cross-origin headers being ignored and seems to be causing some problem with the non-HTTPS version. But BrowZer works just great. We can go back and we can see, let's see, the new identity I made, which would be right here, Clint BrowZer. And so there we have it. That is a pretty cool Ziti TV where we took the management API off the internet entirely. We then used BrowZer to access the ZAC and troubleshooted things, looked at some logs, and had a good time. All right. Well, before I go, if there's any further questions, people can ask. Otherwise, make sure you like and comment and subscribe and all that stupid stuff. Other than that, I'll see you next time on Ziti TV and hope